Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Greg Sloop, and it's time for Live at 5 on this this Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. Hope you're having an absolutely wonderful day. I know things got a little hairy yesterday. We had some technical difficulties and couldn't get on quite right yesterday, so we decided to wait until today. Today, we're going to be looking at Luke 6 and 7. I'm going to do a slightly quicker version of 6 and then get into 7. These two passages, these two chapters are really great chapters talking about the ministry of Jesus. A lot of it is repetitive with Matthew and Mark. So if I go a little quickly, it's because we've already covered some of the material in Matthew and Mark. Let's start with verse 1. Jesus works on the Sabbath, and this is found in both Matthew and Mark, Matthew 12, Mark 2. Now it happened on the second Sabbath after the first that he went through the grain fields, and his disciples plucked the heads of grain and ate them, rubbing them in their hands. And some of the Pharisees said to them, "Why are you doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath?" But Jesus answering them said, "Have you not even read this, what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him, how he went into the house of God, took and ate the showbread, and also gave some to those with him, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat. And he said to them, the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath." Well, this passage does chronicle the incident of the disciples working on the Sabbath to provide food for themselves. And this is also found in John and Mark and in Matthew. When Jesus responds to these people, he does remind them that David ate the showbread and reminded them that Jesus was the Lord of the Sabbath. This, they said, broke the law. The Sabbath day, there were some specific regulations, but some of the things that they considered work on the Sabbath were actually more part of tradition than they were part of the original command not to work on the Sabbath. Then Jesus heals on the Sabbath, another form of working on the Sabbath that got everybody kind of tore up. Verse 6 is where it starts. Now it happened on another Sabbath also, that he entered the synagogue and taught. And a man was there whose right hand was withered. So the scribes and Pharisees watched him closely, whether he would heal on the Sabbath, that they might find an accusation against him. But he knew their thoughts and said to the man who had the withered hand, "Arise and stand here." And he arose and stood. Then Jesus said to them, "I will ask you one thing. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or destroy?" And when they had looked around at them all, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." And he did so, and the hand was restored as whole as the other one. But they were all filled with rage and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus. Well, Jesus also on the Sabbath, after he had already let the disciples roll grain in their hands so that they could have something to eat, healed a man with a withered or paralyzed hand. He explained that doing good had no restriction of time, and that their traditions circumvented the will of God. They were still angry with him and sought to deal with him, but didn't know exactly what to do yet at this time. Then we go to verse 12, where we see the selection of the 12 apostles. This is also found in Mark. Now it came to pass in those days that he went out to the mountain to pray, and continued all night in prayer to God. And when it was day, he called his disciples to himself, and from them he chose 12, whom he also named apostles: Simon, who he also named Peter, and Andrew his brother, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, Matthew and Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon called the Zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who also became a traitor. And he came down with them and stood on a level place with a crowd of his disciples and a great multitude of people from all Judea and Jerusalem and from the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon, who came to hear him and be healed of their diseases, as well as those who were tormented with unclean spirits, and they were healed. And the whole multitude sought to touch him, for power went out from him and healed them all. According to Luke, the calling of the disciples was just prior to the Sermon on the Plain. Matthew, we call it Sermon on the Mount. It's the same sermon. It's just the perspective from which the person stood that heard the actual sermon itself. He lists the 12. He only uses a different name from Mark, who called Judas the son of James by the name Thaddeus. This passage then moves to Jesus calling his disciples to a great plain where he healed the sick, and then he began preaching the Sermon on the Plain. This version is recorded much less information, much shorter. The Beatitudes are in here, and then kingdom principles are in here, but not the extent to which Jesus taught, or at least was recorded as teaching in Matthew chapter 5. Verse 20, then he lifted up his eyes toward his disciples and said, "Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice in that day, and leap for joy. For indeed your reward is great in heaven, for in like manner their fathers did to the prophets." So there's the blessing side of the Beatitudes. Then we move to something that Matthew did not include, and that's the woes. He included them, but he included them in a different space in the Sermon on the Mount in his account. Here's verse 24. "But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full, for you shall hunger. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets." Points to ponder here. Luke's recollection of the Beatitudes is nearly identical to that of Matthew. It doesn't have everything that Matthew had in the blessing part, but it does have everything that it contains is almost identical to Matthew. His ending of it is less detailed than that of Matthew, and he also includes these woes we talked about with this same passage, stating the converse of the blessings to the righteous by pronouncing woes on the wicked. And this seems to be basically the same format of the Deuteronomy passage. I believe it's over chapter 28 maybe, which pronounces blessings for obedience, for the obedient, and curses on the disobedient. Then he moves to rules of kingdom life. Verse 27, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who spitefully use you. To him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. But if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners and receive as much back. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, hoping for nothing in return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the unthankful and evil. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. This passage is also paralleled in Matthew, and it describes what Jesus is teaching to be normal Christian behavior. Some of it is quite contrary to religious tradition of the day of Jesus. However, this begins a call to a new day of life under the leadership of the Messiah. Then we move to a section about the parable of the blind leading the blind. And he spoke a parable to them. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not fall into the ditch? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is perfectly trained will be like his teacher. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, brother, let me remove the speck that is in your eye, when you yourself do not see the plank that is in your own eye? Hypocrite! First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck that is in your brother's eye. For a good tree does not bear bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. For every tree is known by its own fruit. For men do not gather figs from thorns, nor do they gather grapes from a bramble bush. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Jesus here speaks of the need for introspection. Instead of trying to fix everyone else that you think is living in error, make sure that your life is right with God first. Be self-aware. Also, be sure that your actions and words will reflect your heart. Make the heart pure first, then work on the actions. And then, I believe this is the last passage. Yes, it is the last passage in this chapter. Parable of the two foundations. It's found in Matthew 7 as well. But why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do the things which I say? Whoever comes to me and hears my sayings and does them, I will show you whom he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep and laid the foundation on the rock. And when the flood arose, the stream beat vehemently against that house and could not shake it, for it was founded on the rock. But he who heard and did nothing is like a man who built a house on the earth without a foundation, against which the stream beat vehemently, and immediately it fell. And the ruin of that house was great. Well, finally, here Luke shares also the story of a man building a house. Those to hear and live by Jesus' teachings are like people building a house on a solid foundation. Those ignoring Christ build on sand, and there's no defense when the storms come. So don't let your heart be filled with earthly, worldly things. Build on the rock. Don't let the storms overwhelm you. Build on the rock. That's the word for today. I know I said I was going to do 6 and 7 today. I'm just going to have this chapter 6 posted up for yesterday, which is when it should have been on. And I'm going to do chapter 7 here in just a moment. Hope you'll be blessed by both. May God bless you richly. And I look forward to seeing you live at 5 later on today, the 7th.